So with the recent release of Silent Hill F, I figured it's time to once again head back to that special town filled with fog and monsters as I give you guys my updated rankings of the best Silent Hill games of all time. The franchise has been around for almost as long as Resident Evil, and it's arguably the best competition to the Resident Evil series, even if it doesn't have nearly as many games as the RE franchise has. But while Resident Evil is largely viewed as the king of survival horror, Silent Hill is kind of like the king of psychological horror, as this franchise dives deeper into darker and more disturbing stories straight out of our worst nightmares. So on this episode of Nerd Space Games, we're taking a look at the 10 best Silent Hill games as of 2025. Before we get started though, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing to the channel for more survival horror content. Also hit that like button if you enjoyed today's topic. Anyway, my name is Ruben with Nerd Space Games, and this is my top 10 best Silent Hill games of all time. Let's get it. Number 10, Silent Hill Shattered Memories. There's an argument that could be made that the Silent Hill Shattered Memories game could very well be one of the best stories of the Silent Hill franchise. Funny enough though, Shattered Memories is actually technically a reimagining of the first Silent Hill game. However, without diving into spoiler territory, Shattered Memories definitely takes some liberties to change up the story drastically and tell a completely different story compared to what we saw in the first game. On top of that, the gameplay mechanics are changed from the psychological survival horror aspects to a more narrative-driven psychological horror game. While there are puzzles and gameplay mechanics that revolve around the player running from monsters in a nightmare-like reality, most of the gameplay focuses on making decisions that ultimately affect the ending of the game. Again, trying to avoid spoilers here, but let's just say that the story here is an extremely deep one that'll leave you speechless by the end of it all. Despite that though, there are some problems with this game that keep it from moving higher up on today's list. For one, I don't think it should be a Silent Hill game, especially one that deals with characters that we have seen in previous Silent Hill games. The other issue that I have with this game is that it doesn't really feel like a horror game, at least not as much as other Silent Hill games do. Instead, it just feels like a psychological thriller with a deep story. That's not exactly a bad thing, but it just doesn't feel like a Silent Hill game. That's even more frustrating when you consider that this game was technically supposed to be a reimagining of the first game, the Silent Hill game that arguably needed a remake the most in my opinion. Thankfully, we won't have to wait too long for a more loyal remake of the first Silent Hill game, as Bloober Team, the development team behind the Silent Hill 2 remake, have already confirmed that they are working on a Silent Hill 1 remake, so be sure to stay subscribed for more updates regarding that game. Number 9, Silent Hill Downpour. Silent Hill Downpour is probably the most mid-level Silent Hill game of the entire franchise. By that, I mean it has its share of positives while also having its fair share of negatives, which ultimately puts the game close to the middle of the pack of the series. The game centers around Murphy, a convict who was arrested for a reason that is revealed later in the game. What's really interesting about this is that his crime is actually different based on the decisions made throughout the game. As always, I'll avoid spoilers, but throughout the game, the player will have the opportunity to make certain decisions that will change Murphy's personality. These choices ultimately change Murphy's backstory as well as the ending of the game. That's actually one of the most interesting traits of Silent Hill Downpour. Unfortunately, this benefit is met with a negative trait as well. Because Murphy is like a blank canvas in terms of his backstory and personality, some of his interactions with other characters in the game make little to no sense. It comes off as bland and conflicting based on the character he's revealed to be later on in the game depending on your actions. The gameplay is also pretty mid as well. While it's leaps and bounds better than the combat scene in Homecoming, it still doesn't hold up against the earlier entries of the franchise. Elements of the combat still feels less like a horror game and more like an action game. The semi-open world aspect of the game was actually interesting to explore, but at times it could be a bit overwhelming. Overall, Silent Hill Downpour is not a bad game, but it's not a great game either, which is why I decided to put it at the number 9 spot on today's list. Number 8, PT. Okay, so technically speaking, PT is actually not an actual game, but rather a demo for a canceled Silent Hill game. Despite being a demo though, PT is arguably the scariest game in the Silent Hill franchise, and with that being said, even as a demo, it just felt completely wrong to not feature it on today's list. As a game that pretty much put walking horror simulators on the map, PT paved the road for so many horror games to follow in its footsteps. While it's a relatively short experience, PT was more impactful than most horror games of its time. At the time of its release, nobody knew that it was actually a teaser for the next Silent Hill game, Silent Hills. During the game, the player will explore a small house over and over again as a vengeful ghost named Lisa would continue to torment the player throughout the entire experience. Between the jump scares, the top-notch atmospheric horror setting, and the uneasy moments such as the fetus in the bathroom sink, PT is without a doubt one of the scariest games out there that created a movement within that horror genre. However, due to the lack of gameplay and a story that was never fully fleshed out due to it being a canceled project, PT fails to move any higher on today's list. Number 7, Silent Hill 4 The Room. When taking a look at the 4 Team Silent games, Silent Hill 4 The Room is my least favorite game developed by the original creators of the Silent Hill franchise. That doesn't mean that this is a bad game, it just means that it doesn't hold up against every other Team Silent game in my opinion. Still, there's a lot about Silent Hill 4 that I really do appreciate and love. For one, Walter Sullivan is arguably the best villain of the entire Silent Hill franchise. Yeah, I find him to be way more interesting than Dahlia Gillespie, Claudia Wolf, or any other villain of the Silent Hill franchise. Part of the reason comes from the way that we could in some ways feel bad for this homicidal maniac. Also, unlike every other entry of the franchise, Silent Hill 4 The Room is less about the main character and his backstory and more about the villain, Walter Sullivan, and his backstory. That's something that we really don't get to see much in the Silent Hill franchise, and it's something that I really appreciate about the 4th installment of the franchise. Also, while I wasn't a major fan of the first person perspective when visiting the apartment room, I did really enjoy the idea of cleansing the hauntings that appeared in the apartment. It added a level on uneasiness in the place that we were supposed to feel safe at, and I really appreciated that mechanic. Finally, I've also grown to appreciate Henry a lot more than I used to, mainly because I understand how he's someone that battles with social anxiety, and that's something that a lot of people could easily relate to. Still, I don't think he's as interesting as the other Team Silent Hill main protagonist, or even the newest protagonist of the series, Hanako. As for the negatives of the game, Silent Hill 4 marked a first for the franchise at the time in terms of it prioritizing combat over puzzle solving. While there are still some puzzles in Silent Hill 4, it's nowhere near the levels of the first 3 Silent Hill games. Also, the worlds in Silent Hill 4 The Room are far less exciting than other entries above it. And the second half of the game makes you revisit these exact same locations all over again with minor additions to the area during your second visit in each world. The combat is surprisingly more clunky than the last 2 entries of the franchise, Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3. So for that reason, I just have to put Silent Hill 4 The Room outside of the top 5 at number 7. Number 6, Silent Hill Origins. Silent Hill Origins might very well be the most underrated game of the Silent Hill franchise. I feel like a lot of people look down on the Silent Hill games developed by the Western developers, but Silent Hill Origins was surprisingly a really good entry in the Silent Hill franchise. Of course, it's not without its fair share of negatives though. For one, the fact that just about every item near the player throughout the game is a melee weapon is something that removes the survival horror aspect from the Silent Hill Origins game. In fact, the focus on melee is something that carries over to the next entry, but more on that later. Anyway, since the melee weapons are so powerful thanks to the stun lock effect that they have on each enemy, you'll find yourself saving all of the bullets until you face off against the bosses of the game. This unfortunately makes the game feel less stressful thanks to it not really having limited resources as seen in earlier entries of the franchise. Also, there are some changes made to Alessa's lore that some fans were pretty unhappy with. Still, there's a lot of positives with Silent Hill Origins that ultimately makes it better than most of the entries of the franchise. Firstly, you have the main protagonist, Travis. I actually really like Travis and his backstory, and he feels like one of the most relatable main characters of the entire franchise. Also, even though it messes with Alessa's lore, I love the ability to change between the fog reality and the nightmare reality to solve puzzles and explore different areas of each location. I really love this mechanic, and I think it added a new layer of gameplay compared to previous entries of the series. Also, I love that this game focused on new and old locations within the town of Silent Hill. While we still got to explore the town itself and even Alchemilla Hospital, Origins also allowed us to explore the theater and a new motel as well. As to why I put Origins above Silent Hill 4, for example, it comes down to one preference. I prefer the combat and gameplay feel of Silent Hill Origins over Silent Hill 4 The Room. Number 5, Silent Hill F. Before I get started with this one, I want to note that this will probably be the entry I spend the most time on, as I never had the opportunity to do a review on it, so I have a lot to say here. Anyway, Silent Hill F may very well be the most controversial entry of the series thus far. When I talk to other fans of the Silent Hill franchise, especially fans that have been there since the start of the series, like myself, I've noticed that the community is pretty split on this game. While I don't see many fans calling this game a masterpiece, I do see them leaning one of two ways. Either this game was a decent Silent Hill game and they enjoyed their experience with the game, or the game was just complete dog shit and it has no right being called a Silent Hill game. And I get it, both viewpoints are completely justified, and it really comes down to preference for each fan as to which way they might lean towards. For me though, I'm on the side of it being a decent Silent Hill game. In fact, outside of the original trilogy and the remake of Silent Hill 2, I think it's a better experience than the rest of the franchise. Let's start with the positives. For one, Hanako is up there as one of my favorite protagonists of the series. Her story and the way that Silent Hill F tells her story is extremely creative, and it has me hooked from start to finish. Sure, there were a lot of predictable in-your-face moments with the story, but there were also a lot of things left to interpretation, which I love in my Silent Hill games. Again, I don't want to jump into spoilers, but the last hour or so really opens up Hanako's story and allows us to really understand what's actually happening and her entire motivation throughout the game. It also allows us to understand not only the real world's version of Hanako, but this other world version of her, but again, you'll have to play the game to really understand that. The music, the set pieces, even the story all takes heavy inspiration from Japanese culture, and it's something that allows Silent Hill F to stand out from the rest of the franchise. On the note of the story, I think it's honestly one of the best of the franchise. Sure, it doesn't reach the same highs as say Silent Hill 2 or Silent Hill 3, but I do think the story of Silent Hill F is much more impactful and more emotional than the other games of the series. That's mostly due to the writer of the game, Ryukishi07, who is also known for creating the When They Cry series, a visual novel series that I highly recommend, by the way, if you love dark and disturbing horror games. Okay, now as for the negatives, well, there's a few. The gameplay, while addicting at first, isn't my cup of tea. I don't hate it, but I don't love it either. For one, it feels more like a Souls game than a Silent Hill game thanks to the combat, and I think that's one of the biggest critiques from fans that say this game doesn't feel like a traditional Silent Hill game, and those opinions are 100% fair. Also, not a huge fan of the puzzles. Some of them were okay, but some of them were pretty awful. Granted, I played this game on the hardest puzzle difficulty, so keep that in mind, but there were some puzzles that just made absolutely no sense to me even when I found out the solution. Despite me having these issues though with the combat and the puzzles of the game, these are things that are still done better than a lot of Silent Hill games. The combat, while it doesn't feel like the traditional Silent Hill formula, is still more in line with the franchise and done better than say games like Homecoming and Downpour, or hell, Shattered Memories, which features no combat basically. The puzzles are more interesting and challenging than the other Western developed Silent Hill games as well, including Origins and again Shattered Memories. So yeah, I get the criticism that this game gets, and it absolutely deserves it. Hell, it's one of my most disappointing games of 2025. But let's not forget how bad most of the other Silent Hill games were outside of that traditional trilogy, because truth be told, it's nowhere near as bad as most of those games, you know? Number 4, Silent Hill. The original game that started it all claims the number 4 spot on today's list. There's so much to appreciate about that original Silent Hill game. For one, the main protagonist, Harry Mason, is easily one of the most likable characters of the entire franchise. While most of the main characters of the franchise are dealing with their past or their personal trauma, Harry Mason is there to save and rescue his adopted daughter, Cheryl Mason. For that reason, it's really easy to fall in love with his character after seeing how far he'll go in order to save Cheryl. I mean, the dude literally faces off against monsters straight out of our nightmares, all to get his daughter back. The first game also features some of the most iconic locations. Acapella Hospital is a location that has become a staple of the franchise to the point where we'll see it multiple times in other Silent Hill games. Midwich Elementary still to this day remains one of the scariest locations seen in a horror game. Also, the puzzles in the original Silent Hill game are some of the best. I love the piano puzzle and Zodiac puzzle specifically. The story of Alessa Gillespie is also a really interesting and tragic one. However, compared to every other entry above it on today's list, Silent Hill's gameplay is rough and a bit clunky. In fact, that's why I personally believe that the original Silent Hill game is in most need of a modern remake, which thankfully we'll be getting pretty soon hopefully. But Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3 builds up on those mechanics and features seen in the original game, and that's exactly why both of those games are higher on today's list than the original game. Number 3, Silent Hill 2. In the video that I did last year, Silent Hill 2 was originally my favorite game of the entire franchise. However, a lot has changed for me since replaying most of the franchise in the last few months or so. Regardless of that fact, the original Silent Hill 2 is still to this day one of the best psychological horror games ever created. Everything about this game is incredible. The best part of Silent Hill 2 is without a doubt the story and the characters. Compared to the other games of the franchise, Silent Hill 2 dives much deeper into the personal trauma of each and every character in this game. It explores some really dark and tragic themes, and it turns those demons into physical monsters throughout the entire game. The themes of Silent Hill 2 are stronger than just about every psychological horror game out there. As for the gameplay, Silent Hill 2 improved on the first game drastically, making the combat less clunky and more refined. The puzzles also took a major step forward, as Silent Hill 2 features some of the most iconic and most difficult puzzles of the entire franchise. Puzzles like the coin case and the Brookhaven passcode are just a few that really had me scratching my head for a really long time. Finally, the atmosphere of Silent Hill 2 was, God, it was just for the longest time the best of the franchise. With iconic locations like Brookhaven Hospital, Toluca Prison, and both Woodside and Blue Creek apartments, Silent Hill 2 made each location feel unique to each other. And we can't talk about Silent Hill 2 without mentioning the most iconic villain of the entire franchise, Pyramid Head. Overall, Silent Hill 2 was my favorite Silent Hill game for the longest time, and there's a really strong case that could be made that it should stay at number 1 for me. However, I feel like the top 3 games on this list are interchangeable right now, and if you ask me to rank the franchise again a year from now, you might see the top 3 games move around again. For now, now though, Silent Hill 2 claims the number 3 spot. Number 2, Silent Hill 3. Whereas Silent Hill 2 was far superior in terms of the atmosphere of the game, the story, and the characters, Silent Hill 3 managed to top Silent Hill 2 in other departments. Most importantly though, it was the gameplay. Until recently, Silent Hill 3 was arguably the best gameplay experience within the Silent Hill franchise. Silent Hill for the Room would be a drastic step down from what Silent Hill 3 achieved. The puzzles were some of the best in the entire franchise, more challenging and more creative than the ones seen in Silent Hill 2. Sure, some of them were a bit too difficult in my opinion, Hello Shakespeare puzzle, but overall most of the puzzles were satisfying to solve. The combat in the game was surprisingly really smooth, more so than just about every other entry that came out before and after it with the exception of one other game. And while it didn't top Silent Hill 2 in terms of the story and the characters, Silent Hill 3 still managed to keep us intrigued with Heather's journey from start to finish. Considering that Silent Hill 3 was a direct sequel to the original game of the franchise, fans were already connected to the story from the get-go. For a lot of people, Heather is their favorite character in the franchise, and I could totally see why. Heather has more attitude and personality than just about every other character in the franchise. She has more spunk, and she's not afraid to say what's on her mind no matter how blunt or how rude it comes off. She's an absolute badass who literally fights a cult and their god in order to get revenge for someone she lost. Silent Hill 3 is a phenomenal game, and out of the entire franchise, it's the game that I've replayed the most. Perhaps that's a major reason why I decided to put it higher than Silent Hill 2, because, you know, I just have a lot more fun playing through it, honestly. Number 1, Silent Hill 2 Remake. Look, everything I said about the original Silent Hill 2 could apply here as well. The story is still one of the best in a psychological horror game. The characters are incredible, the puzzles are top notch, and the atmospheric horror vibe of the game is truly impressive. Yet what really skyrockets Silent Hill 2 Remake to the number 1 spot on today's list comes from the improvements made to the game. Outside of the obvious improvements made to the visuals, Bloober Team somehow achieved the impossible by taking one of the best games ever created and improving it in just about every single way. And yes, I know there's people out there that would disagree with that statement, but at least for me personally, I feel like that Silent Hill 2 Remake is an improvement from the original game. I know, sue me, come after me, bring out the pitchforks, I get it. Anyways, while the story is still roughly the same, the characters are explored in a deeper way, making each character way more interesting than they were in the original game. Angela has a deeper emotional connection with the player. Eddie feels more creepy and terrifying compared to the original game, and Luke Roberts' performance as James Sunderland is unmatched. The guy should have won an award for his performance as James Sunderland, by the way, just throwing that out there. Moving on, obviously the gameplay mechanics were more modern, as it took inspiration from Resident Evil 2 Remake, added dodge mechanics, and created a surprisingly good combat system. There are more puzzles in the remake, and the difficulty of them has increased drastically. For example, remember that coin puzzle that I mentioned earlier? Well, the remake took that puzzle and basically turned it into a multi-layered puzzle. The boss fights, something that was somewhat disappointing in the original game, have also seen some improvements, with each boss fight being much more exciting than the original game. However, my favorite change comes from that overall atmosphere of Silent Hill. While the original game was the best in the series in terms of its atmosphere, Silent Hill 2 Remake somehow topped that. From having the ability to explore random buildings throughout Silent Hill to extending the sizes of each location seen in the original game. The perfect example that I can think of is the Woodside apartments and also the Blue Creek apartments. I absolutely loved how the remake handled the transition between both areas. Woodside was still within the fog world and Blue Creek was within this nightmare reality. Overall, Silent Hill 2 Remake is my favorite Silent Hill game for multiple reasons. I can really go on and on about it. Sure, that might change over time as the original Silent Hill 2 and Silent Hill 3 did multiple times throughout the years for me, and the Silent Hill 1 Remake is right around the corner. However, at least for now, it claims the number 1 spot. Great job, Bloober Team. But that does it for this episode of Nerd Games. Hit up the comments and let me know what you think of my list. Is Silent Hill 2 Remake the best game of the Silent Hill franchise, or is there a different game that deserves that title? Do you think I'm crazy for putting Silent Hill F in the top 5 games of the franchise, or do you actually agree with where I ranked it? Let me know all of your thoughts down below. Anyway, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to my channel for more survival horror content. Also leave a like on today's video if you enjoyed today's topic. But thanks for watching, and as always, I'll catch you guys on the next episode of Nerd Games. Take care.